Judge's son never spoke, until new janitor uncovered what no doctor found. Before we begin, if you enjoy deep, emotional stories like this, subscribe to the channel. New stories are posted regularly. The silence in the estate on the hills of Los Angeles was not peaceful. It was a vacuum, cold and absolute, far louder than any actual noise could ever be. It was the sound of Richard's life since the day the clock stopped. Richard, known formally as Judge Rico Valente, was a man carved from granite and regret. At 62, his wealth was immeasurable, his influence sprawling, yet he spent his mornings standing exactly in the center of his vast, empty living room, listening to the crushing quiet. His hand, always, went to the heavy silver chain resting beneath his bespoke suit vest. Attached to the chain was a pocket watch. It was a masterpiece of Swiss engineering, completely flawless, except for the fact that the hands were frozen rigidly at 10 minutes and 7 seconds past 10 in the morning. That was the precise moment 4 years ago, when the sound of the screeching tires turned into a deafening impact, stealing the voice of his 8-year-old son, Leo. Leo was not physically damaged in the traditional sense, at least, not according to the legion of specialists Richard had flown in from around the globe. His vocal cords were fine. His hearing was perfect. Yet, Leo had not uttered a single sound since that morning. He communicated only through slight nods and the heartbreaking blankness in his eyes. He was a beautiful boy trapped behind a glass wall. Richard had tried everything. Behavioral therapy, speech pathologists, radical experimental treatments. Nothing worked. The experts eventually concluded it was a deep psychological defense mechanism, a self-imposed prison Leo had built in the wake of witnessing the accident that had claimed his mother's life. "The trauma is too deep, Judge," Dr. Albright had said, shrugging his very expensive shoulders. He associated speaking with the horror he saw. He chose silence to survive. Richard didn't accept survival. He wanted his son back. He wanted to hear the simple, silly questions Leo used to ask, the way he pronounced the word spaceship with a soft lisp. He wanted the noise. Richard walked slowly across the imported marble floor towards the huge bay window overlooking the perfectly manicured garden. Even the perfection felt sterile. Mrs. Brown, his longtime governess, a woman whose stern features held just a hint of genuine worry, approached him with measured steps. "Judge Valente, the new cleaning service is scheduled to start today. Mrs. Diaz." She promised a deep clean of the West Wing offices. Richard merely nodded, his eyes fixed on the distant smog line hugging the valley. "Keep them away from Leo, Mrs. Brown. Absolute minimum interaction. And make sure they understand the silence policy." "Of course, sir." She was extremely insistent on the work. "I believe she is having some financial difficulties." "Everyone has financial difficulties, Mrs. Brown. I want competence and discretion. That is all." He pulled the pocket watch out, tracing the outline of the stopped hands with his thumb. 10:07. 10:07. The hands of time might move for the rest of the world, but for Richard, they were stuck, perpetually reliving the moment his life shattered. His immense power meant nothing against the force of a little boy's silence. Meanwhile, miles away in the sweltering heat of the downtown district, Sophie was executing her daily mission. 6 years old, small for her age, with hair tied back in 2 fierce pigtails, she navigated the chaos of the intersection like a seasoned veteran. Her mission was simple: survive the day and earn enough for her mother's medicine. Sophie didn't have a normal childhood. Her playground was the corner of 5th and Grand. Her toys were the colorful packets of hard candies she sold to impatient drivers waiting for the signal to change. The LA sun beat down, turning the asphalt into a shimmering mirage. Sophie ignored the sweat stinging her eyes. She wore a too-big shirt, faded blue, which offered little relief. She held her plastic container of candy, calculating the traffic patterns. A red BMW was coming up. Expensive car, maybe a good tip. She approached the window, lifting the container high enough for the driver to see the bright colors. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her large, soulful eyes did the work. They held a plea more powerful than any spoken word, a quiet urgency that cut through the city noise. Most people ignored her, staring straight ahead. Some waved her away with irritation. But today, the driver in the BMW, a young woman engrossed in a phone call, finally noticed her. She rolled down the window a few inches. "How much, sweetie?" the woman asked, distracted, pulling out a $20 bill. Sophie held up 3 fingers, indicating $3 for a pack. The woman handed her the 20, grabbed a pack of lemon drops, and immediately rolled the window back up, forgetting the change. Sophie watched the BMW zoom away. She didn't chase her. She never chased them. $20 was a huge win. That was 3 days of mom's medication. A slow, tired smile touched her lips. Her mother, Maria, was back in their tiny, suffocating apartment, suffering from a chronic respiratory illness that required expensive, specialized medication. Maria was a proud woman. She refused charity. She worked when she could, cleaning houses, but lately, the illness kept her confined. The need for money was constant and crushing. Sophie knew her role. She had to be invisible, fast, and silent. Silence was safe. Silence allowed her to observe, to anticipate the rhythm of the city. She finished her shift when the shadows began to lengthen, her small canvas bag heavy with coins and crumpled bills. She had earned $57 today. A miracle day. She hurried back to the small apartment building. The air inside was thick and smelled of disinfectant and sickness. Maria lay on the pull-out couch, looking terribly pale. "Sophie, mi amor," Maria whispered, coughing softly. "You shouldn't have worked so long. It's too hot." "It's okay, Mama. Look." Sophie poured the money onto the stained kitchen table. $57. "We can buy the inhaler refill tomorrow, and maybe some fresh fruit." Maria weakly reached out and stroked Sophie's cheek. "You are my strength, little one. But I hate that you must do this." "I don't mind," Sophie lied gently. She did mind the heat, the rejection, the fear, but she knew her mother needed to believe she was strong. "I got a new job, Sophie," Maria said, taking a deeper breath. "A big one. A mansion up in Bel Air. The judge's estate. It's only temporary, covering for their usual crew, but the pay is excellent. Enough to stabilize us for months." Sophie's eyes widened slightly. "A mansion. A world away from the dust and noise. I start tomorrow. But I can't leave you alone, Sophie. I told Mrs. Brown you would be quiet. You must be silent as a mouse. They are very particular about noise." Maria looked intensely at her daughter, especially the judge. His son, he had an accident. They need quiet. Sophie understood silence. It was the language of survival. She nodded seriously. The next morning, the contrast was jarring. One moment, Sophie was enduring the gritty bus ride up the mountain. The next, she was stepping onto the pristine, sculpted grounds of the Valente estate. Everything was green, fragrant, and vast. The air was cool and clean. Mrs. Brown, dressed immaculately, met them at the service entrance. She looked Maria up and down, clearly judging the worn state of her uniform. "Mrs. Diaz, I expect absolute perfection and the highest level of discretion. Your daughter must remain with you at all times, only in the West Wing, and she must be utterly silent. Do you understand? The judge's son, Leo, is very sensitive." "We understand completely, Mrs. Brown. Sophie is a very quiet child." Maria squeezed Sophie's shoulder. Maria was assigned the task of scrubbing the enormous, an used library and the adjacent home offices. Sophie followed, gripping the handle of the rolling bucket cart. The silence inside the mansion was different from the silence Sophie knew on the streets. Street silence was the momentary lull before a horn blared or a siren wailed. This silence was permanent, heavy, like a suffocating velvet curtain. Maria worked tirelessly, polishing ancient wood and dusting leather-bound books. Sophie sat quietly on a stool near the window, watching the sun dapple the garden outside. It was dull but safe. Suddenly, a disturbance. A rhythmic, faint tapping sound echoed down the long hallway. Maria froze. What was that? Sophie, stay here. Maria slipped out to investigate, worried about breaking the strict silence rule. Sophie, however, was drawn by the sound. It wasn't the sound of an adult. It was slow, uneven, like a small, sad drumbeat. She crept to the doorway of the library. The hallway was empty, but the sound was coming from the staircase landing. Sophie tiptoed out, her small feet making no sound on the runner rug. She peered around the corner. There he was. He was a boy slightly older than her, sitting alone on the third step of the grand staircase. He had luminous brown eyes and hair the color of midnight. He was beautiful, but his face held a profound loneliness. He was holding a smooth, gray river stone and gently tapping it against the wooden banister. Fuzz, tap tap, fuzz. He was speaking not with his mouth, but with the stone. Sophie watched him, unmoving. She recognized the look in his eyes, the way he looked past things, not at them. It was the same look she sometimes saw in the eyes of the city pigeons, endlessly circling, never landing. Leo looked up, startled. He hadn't heard her approach. His tapping stopped instantly. His eyes widened slightly in fear, or perhaps just surprise. Sophie remained silent. She did not smile. She did not approach. She simply stood, observing him with the same detached intensity she used when watching the traffic flow. Leo quickly tucked the stone into the pocket of his tailored shorts. He stood up abruptly and started to retreat, moving back up the stairs towards the darkness of the upper hall. Sophie reached into her own pocket. She pulled out the only object she carried that wasn't money or candy, a small, smooth piece of green sea glass she had found years ago on a rare trip to the beach. It was her talisman, a reminder that something beautiful could be forged from rough chaos. She held the sea glass up, catching the light streaming from the high window. She didn't offer it to him. She just held it, letting the sunlight refract through the translucent green. Leo stopped, halfway up the stairs. He hesitated. He had seen thousands of expensive toys, but he had never seen a 6-year-old girl holding something so simple with such fierce pride. He watched her for a long moment, then slowly, tentatively, he walked back down a step. Just then, Richard emerged from his office down the hall. He was holding his pocket watch, having just checked the time again. 10:07. He saw the scene, his mute son, frozen halfway up the stairs, and a strange little girl standing silently below him, holding a worthless shard of glass. What is going on here? Richard's voice was sharp, cutting through the heavy air. Leo flinched violently, shrinking into himself. The moment of connection was shattered. Sophie instantly tucked the sea glass away and melted back towards the library door, her head bowed low. Maria rushed out, breathless. Judge Valente, I am so sorry. I told her to stay put. Maria looked terrified, fearing the immediate loss of the crucial employment. Richard looked from the terrified mother to the retreating daughter, then to his son, whose face had instantly closed off, replaced by that familiar mask of absence. Mrs. Diaz, Richard said, his voice dangerously low. I stressed the need for discretion and silence. This house is meant to be a sanctuary for my son. She didn't say anything, sir. I promise. She never speaks to strangers. Richard stared at Sophie, who was now standing stock still beside her mother. He realized the mother was right. The child hadn't made a sound. She was like a shadow, quick and mute. "Ensure it does not happen again," Richard commanded, his tone dismissive. He turned his attention back to Leo. "Son, let's go back to the study." Leo shuffled past Richard, keeping his eyes on the floor, avoiding any eye contact, even with his father. Richard watched them walk away, the silence re-establishing its tyrannical grip. That night, Richard couldn't shake the image of the little girl and the green glass. Why had Leo stopped? Why had he looked at her with something approaching curiosity, an expression Richard hadn't seen in years? The next day, Maria returned to work, and Sophie was once again nestled in the library, drawing stick figures in a discarded notepad. Richard, consumed by a need he couldn't name, instructed Mrs. Brown to move Maria's cleaning zone. "Have them clean the third-floor landing area today, Mrs. Brown. The boys' wing needs attention." Mrs. Brown looked skeptical. "Sir, that's Leo's private area. We usually have the staff avoid that entire floor." "I am aware, Mrs. Brown. Just follow the instructions. And ensure the little girl stays in the vicinity." Richard didn't explain his motive even to himself. He was performing a bizarre, desperate experiment. Maria and Sophie were soon at work cleaning the hallway adjacent to Leo's large bedroom suite. Maria was focused on washing the deep-set windows, humming a quiet tune. Sophie sat on the carpet, using small blocks of wood she found in a discarded construction toy set. Leo's door was slightly ajar. He was inside, supposedly reading. Sophie began to arrange the blocks. She didn't stack them into a tower or build a house. She laid them out in a long, winding sequence. Then, she picked up the gray river stone Leo had been tapping the day before. She had seen where he dropped it when his father appeared, and placed it carefully at the beginning of the wooden line. She then tapped the stone very lightly against the first block. She waited. The tapping came again, slow and measured, repeating the sequence Leo had used yesterday. Tap tap. From inside the room, a responding sound, a quiet, almost imperceptible scrape. Sophie waited patiently, her gaze fixed on the door crack. She tapped the stone again, making her sequence slightly different. Tap tap. A full minute passed. Then, the door creaked open further. Leo stood there, holding a worn, wooden bird figurine. He looked directly at Sophie. He walked towards the line of blocks she had created. He didn't look at Sophie's face. He looked at the blocks. He recognized the pattern, the silent invitation. Leo knelt down slowly and placed his wooden bird beside the river stone. He then pushed the bird gently against the first block. The blocks began to fall, one against the other, in a silent, beautiful chain reaction. A domino effect. Sophie watched, fascinated. This was not a game of imagination. This was structured communication. When the last block fell, Leo looked at Sophie, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something other than fear or blankness, a spark of satisfaction. Sophie reached into her pocket and pulled out the sea glass. She placed it at the end of the fallen blocks. It wasn't a block, it wouldn't fall. It was the end point, the destination. Leo stared at the green glass. He picked up his bird, holding it tightly, then pointed the bird's beak towards the glass. Sophie nodded slightly. Destination. The bond was instant and wordless, established not through shared laughter or games, but through shared silence and meticulous observation. Sophie understood the need for silent communication because her own existence relied on it. She couldn't waste words on the street, and here, words were dangerous. Richard watched the entire exchange from the surveillance monitor in his hidden study. He had motion detectors in the hallway and cameras placed strategically, a habit left over from his judicial career. He had been planning to interrupt the moment, certain the housekeeper's child would distract Leo negatively. But what he saw was the exact opposite of distraction. It was focus. It was interaction. If you're enjoying this story so far, make sure you're subscribed. You won't want to miss what comes next. He watched as Sophie and Leo began to set up the blocks again, this time designing a more complicated path, weaving around the marble statue placed near the hallway entrance. They never spoke. They used gestures, slight shifts of their shoulders, or specific placement of the gray stone and the green glass. The stone was always the beginning, the glass was the end. Richard felt a tightness in his chest, a strange mix of hope and intense professional skepticism. This was not medicine. This was just two silent children playing. Yet Leo was engaged, fully present. He stood up, walking over to the window. Outside, the world was moving. Traffic flowed, birds sang, clouds drifted. Inside his pocket, the watch was frozen. 10:07. He thought about Sophie, the child of the janitor, the girl who sold candy in the heat to keep her mother alive. She carried the weight of the world, yet she played with his son with such deliberate, quiet care. Richard sat back down, pulling out his phone. He needed to know more about this silent interaction. He searched for books on nonverbal communication, on trauma responses, on the language of objects. His judge's mind, trained to find patterns in chaos, began to search for the pattern in the blocks, the stone, and the glass. Maria returned to the library that afternoon, finding Sophie drawing intently. "The judge is very particular, Sophie. Did you stay away from the boy?" Sophie simply held up her drawing. It wasn't a stick figure. It was a perfect, intricate drawing of the winding path of the domino blocks, ending with a shiny green. Maria frowned. "What is this?" "This is very precise." "A map," Sophie wrote on the corner of the paper with a borrowed pencil. "If you believe destiny brings the right people together, type destiny in the comments now." The days began to blur into a new routine. Maria cleaned, Richard observed, and Sophie and Leo conducted their silent sessions. They moved from blocks to small, found objects, acorns, twisted paper clips, tiny pebbles. Each object seemed to represent a word, or perhaps a memory. Richard started leaving out specific objects. A miniature replica of a sailing ship. A small, tarnished silver bell. He watched, holding his breath, as Leo would integrate these into their silent narratives, responding to Sophie's placement of the sea glass. One afternoon, Richard decided to intervene directly. He waited until Maria was busy in the kitchen, supervised by Mrs. Brown. He walked silently down the hallway and found Sophie and Leo seated across from each other, surrounded by their objects. Leo was using a large, smooth oak leaf. He pushed it towards Sophie. Sophie picked up the leaf and placed it next to the gray river stone. Beginning. Then she looked up and saw Richard standing there. Her eyes widened, but she didn't flinch away. She held Richard's gaze. Richard spoke, his voice unusually soft. "What is the stone, Leo?" Leo looked down immediately. He grabbed the oak leaf, crumpled it slightly, and shoved it into the pile of objects, ending the game instantly. The mask was back. Richard realized his mistake. He had used the one thing Leo feared, an adult voice demanding an explanation. "I apologize," Richard said, addressing both children. "I didn't mean to interrupt your story." Sophie gave a tiny shake of her head. She pointed one small finger at the river stone, then at Leo's wooden bird, then at Richard. Richard understood the silent question. "Why are you scared?" Richard knelt down awkwardly, his tailored suit protesting the movement. He was at eye level with the children. "Leo is afraid of sound, Sophie. My sound. Of any sound that reminds him of what happened." Sophie understood fear. Fear was the hot asphalt and the ignored pleas for candy. She picked up the sea glass. She held it out to Leo. Leo hesitated, then reached out and took the glass. He held it tightly, watching his father. Richard felt an overwhelming wave of guilt. He had built a fortress of wealth and silence, but the only thing that penetrated it was a small piece of green trash held by a janitor's daughter. "Leo, I miss your voice," Richard whispered, the first time he had admitted that raw truth out loud. Leo didn't react. He held the sea glass and stared at the floor. Suddenly, Mrs. Brown rushed down the hall, holding her hands up in alarm. "Judge Valente, I'm sorry to disturb you, but Mrs. Diaz is ill. Very ill. She has had a terrible coughing fit. She needs to leave immediately." Richard stood up, his professional facade snapping back into place. "Get her assistance, Mrs. Brown. Call a car service. Pay her for the full day." Maria was genuinely distressed, clutching her chest. "I am so sorry, Judge. I must go. Sophie, come now." Sophie looked at Leo. Leo looked terrified, as if the only bridge he had built was suddenly being taken away. Sophie walked over to Leo and gently touched his arm. She didn't have time for a silent game. She pulled out the remaining $50 she had earned from the candy sales. She pressed the money, along with the sea glass, into Leo's hand. Leo looked confused, then deeply hurt. He thought she was abandoning him. Sophie's eyes communicated desperation and promise. She pointed at the money, then mimed swallowing a pill, then pointed back to herself. It was a complex sequence. "I need to go buy medicine, but I will come back." Leo clutched the money and the glass. He gave the smallest nod Richard had ever seen from him. Richard watched the interaction, realizing the gravity of the situation. Sophie wasn't just working for school money, she was working for life. He pulled Maria aside. "Mrs. Diaz, how much does the medication cost?" Maria's pride flared, despite her wheezing breaths. "It's nothing, Judge. We manage." "I am a judge, Maria. I calculate costs daily. Tell me the actual expense." Maria finally relented, giving him the precise, astronomical weekly cost of the specialized treatment her doctor insisted upon. Richard pulled out his wallet. He didn't hand her cash. He handed her a card. "Take this. Go directly to Dr. Chen's clinic. I will call ahead. Get the best care possible. You focus on recovery. Sophie, you will stay here." Maria looked at the card, then at Richard, speechless. "I can't accept this, sir." "Consider it an investment in my son's well-being," Richard stated firmly. "Sophie has achieved more with him in 3 days than 4 years of doctors. You will not clean again until you are completely healthy. And you, young lady," he looked at Sophie, "you will remain here. You have a lesson to teach Leo." Sophie looked at the luxurious mansion, then at Leo, then back at her mother. She nodded her assent. And so, Sophie became an unofficial and highly peculiar resident of the Valente estate. Mrs. Brown was outraged by the informal arrangement, but Richard was resolute. "She is essential to Leo's development, Mrs. Brown. Find a way to incorporate her without disrupting the household structure. Get her new clothes. Enroll her in a summer program. But she must stay close to Leo." Sophie and Leo's relationship deepened quickly without the daily fear of separation. Their silent language evolved. The stone represented a question or a beginning. The sea glass represented an answer, a closure, or a goal. They spent hours in the sun-drenched conservatory, building complex narratives with objects. Richard continued to observe, meticulously recording the sequences, searching for the key. One afternoon, they were outside near the koi pond. Leo was agitated. He kept pushing the gray river stone towards Sophie, over and over, pointing towards a specific spot in the garden. A tall, ancient oak tree. Sophie was confused. She kept placing the sea glass next to the stone, trying to end the sequence, but Leo insisted, pushing the stone repeatedly toward the oak. Richard approached, holding his breath. "What is it, son? What is wrong with the tree?" Leo didn't look at his father. He stood up and walked to the base of the tree. He pressed his entire body against the rough bark. Then he sank to the ground, pulling his knees up to his chest, rocking slightly. This was Leo's posture of deepest distress. Richard felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. The oak tree. That location was close to the road where the accident happened. Sophie ran over to Leo. She didn't try to comfort him with touch. Instead, she knelt beside the oak tree and scanned the bark meticulously. She seemed to be looking for something invisible. Richard watched her, realizing she was searching for the physical key to Leo's distress, the thing his eyes were trained to ignore. Sophie found it. Not on the tree, but embedded in the soil just at the base of the trunk. A small, rusty piece of metal, sticking up like a broken tooth. She pulled it out carefully. It was a piece of shattered chrome, maybe from a headlight housing. It was small, sharp, and clearly broken off a vehicle. Leo gasped, a tiny raw sound that made Richard jump. Richard recognized the piece instantly. It was from the grille of his wife's car, the car that had been totaled 4 years ago. It must have flown into the yard during the impact. Sophie held the shard of chrome, then looked at Leo. She placed the shard down, next to the oak tree. Then she placed the gray river stone next to the shard. Leo began to tremble. His breathing became erratic. Sophie looked at the chrome, then pointed towards Richard, then towards the stopped pocket watch in his vest pocket. Richard felt his heart hammering against his ribs. She was connecting the physical remnant of the crash to Richard's obsession with the time. Sophie then did something shocking. She held the chrome piece up, angling it so the afternoon sun reflected harshly off the rusty surface. She then took the river stone and tapped the chrome piece, hard. Clang. It was a sharp, terrible metallic sound. It wasn't loud, but in the silence of the estate, it felt like a gunshot. Leo screamed. It wasn't a word. It was a primal, gut-wrenching sound of terror and pain, raw and guttural. Richard rushed forward, intending to shield his son, terrified that Sophie had just undone all the progress. Leo was shaking uncontrollably, covering his ears, his body convulsing with suppressed memories. Richard knelt beside him, holding him gently. "It's all right, son, it's all right," Richard repeated, but Leo didn't calm down. Sophie, however, did not flinch. She kept her position near the tree. She held the gray stone, then picked up the small silver bell Richard had placed out earlier. She tapped the bell against the chrome shard again. Sing. A lighter, less threatening sound. Leo's screaming subsided into ragged, loud sobs. Richard realized what was happening. Sophie wasn't trying to re-traumatize him. She was forcing him to confront the sound he associated with the trauma, but providing different sounds immediately afterward to try and overwrite the horror. Sophie looked at Richard, her eyes imploring him. Richard knew he had to participate, to break his own silence. He reached into his vest, pulling out the pocket watch. The hand still stood rigidly at 10:07. He grabbed the watch, not gently but firmly. "Leo," Richard said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I know what you heard. The impact. The metal on metal." He took the chrome shard from Sophie, and looking Leo straight in the eyes, he smashed the shard against the glass face of the pocket watch. The crystal shattered, flying onto the grass. The delicate mechanism inside crumpled. Richard destroyed the anchor of his own guilt, the symbol of the frozen time. The sharp, final sound echoed in the garden. Leo stared at the broken watch, his body tense. Richard held the broken watch in one hand and pointed at the shattered glass. "The sound is gone, Leo. It's over. It's just pieces now. Not the crash, Not anymore. He waited, heart pounding. The only sound was Leo's heavy, uneven breathing. Leo slowly, painfully, opened his mouth. His jaw worked, clearly trying to form a shape, to release a sound that had been trapped for 4 years. Sophie watched, tears streaming down her face, the sea glass clutched in her hand. Leo looked at the broken watch, then at the piece of chrome, then at the towering oak tree. He finally looked at his father. He pointed a shaking finger at the broken watch glass, and then, in a scratchy, underdeveloped voice, he spoke the first word Richard had heard in 4 years. "Stop." Richard gasped, collapsing slightly onto the grass. "Yes, son. It stopped. It all stopped." Leo struggled again, pushing past the pain in his throat, the terror in his memory. He looked at Sophie holding the sea glass. Sophie smiled through her tears. Then, Leo looked back at the tree, the place of the horror, and then he looked at his father, at the man who had always been distant, judging, silent in his grief. You broke it." Richard laughed, a sound that was half sob, half hysterical relief. "I did, son. I finally broke it." Leo spoke the words that the doctors, the therapists, and the endless medical treatments had failed to unlock. He spoke the horror, the memory associated with the sound of the crash, and then he finally spoke the name of the girl who had forced him to face it. The dam had broken. In the weeks that followed, Richard made good on his promises. Maria was moved into a fully serviced apartment near a specialized clinic, her medical care covered completely. She began to heal quickly, the financial and emotional stress lifted. Sophie was enrolled in the most exclusive private school Richard could find, but she continued her daily sessions with Leo. Leo's voice was shaky at first, filled with the lost years, but it grew stronger quickly, fueled by Sophie's patient presence. They were no longer silent partners. They talked constantly, Leo telling Sophie all the stories he had kept bottled up inside, and Sophie sharing tales of the relentless, noisy streets of El. Richard found himself listening, truly listening, for the first time in a decade. He understood that his wealth had created a gilded cage, isolating them both from the raw, human necessity of connection. Sophie, the girl who sold $3 candy bars, had offered a priceless connection, a willingness to see the trauma for what it was, a sound trapped in time, and provide a release. Richard never replaced the pocket watch. He kept it in his study, the broken crystal and the frozen hands a constant reminder of the 4 years he lost, and the moment he finally chose to move forward. He replaced it with a simple, digital clock on his desk, its numbers relentlessly ticking forward, marking the movement of time and healing. One evening, Richard walked into the living room and found Leo and Sophie sprawled on the floor, doing homework. Leo was laughing, a real, booming laugh, at something Sophie had drawn. "Judge Valente," Mrs. Brown said, standing nearby, watching the children with a softness in her eyes Richard had never seen before. "I must admit, the atmosphere in the house is completely different. It's loud." Richard smiled, pulling out his reading glasses. "Yes, Mrs. Brown. Thankfully it is." He looked at Sophie, who was now truly laughing, free from the crushing pressure of the streets. She was safe, loved, and absolutely essential. He had offered Maria a job managing the estate's vast gardens once she was well enough, knowing he could never truly repay what her daughter had given him. He had started searching for a larger property, one with enough room for Maria and Sophie to live comfortably and permanently. They were family now, bound by the fragile, powerful sound of a little boy's voice breaking through 4 years of silence. If this story touched your heart, like the video and share it with someone you consider family.